The fire spread fast, too fast. As Eric fought to put it out, his security cameras caught something chilling. Two men watching from the shadows, and when he saw who they were, his blood ran cold. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Let's start from the beginning. Eric had dealt with pushy salesmen and aggressive solicitors before, but this was different. Todd and Greg weren't just running a scam. They carried themselves like men who were used to getting their way. The way Todd smirked, the way Greg barely spoke but sized up the house like he already owned it. It all felt off. Eric knew real HOA representatives didn't show up unannounced and certainly didn't issue fines on the spot. Yet, here they were, standing on his porch in cheap knockoff uniforms, shoving a bogus citation into his hands as if they had actual authority. The paper had no official letterhead, no signatures, just a list of violations that read more like personal preferences than actual regulations. "That tree's a problem," Greg finally spoke, his voice flat. "Roots could damage your foundation. Liability issue." Eric glanced at the massive oak that had stood in his yard longer than his house had. It wasn't sick, wasn't causing damage. The only problem was that it blocked the view from the street, their view. "And the fence?" Eric asked, folding his arms. Todd clicked his tongue. "Wrong color. HOA standards require neutral tones." Eric narrowed his eyes. His entire street had mismatched fences, some in worse condition than his. "There are no HOA standards on fences," he said, calling their bluff. Todd's smirk didn't waver. Instead, he took a step closer. "Look, buddy, we can do this the easy way, or we escalate," he said, voice dripping with fake patience. Eric's jaw clenched. Escalate? What did that even mean? He didn't care to find out. Without another word, he crumpled the citation and tossed it back at them before slamming the door. Through the peephole, he watched them linger on his porch, exchanging looks. Todd muttered something under his breath, and Greg let out a quiet chuckle. Then, without urgency, they turned and walked away. Most scammers would cut their losses and move on, but as Eric watched them disappear down the street, unease twisted in his gut. These two weren't finished with him. He could feel it. Smoke billowed into the night sky, thick and black. The acrid smell hit Eric's nose before he even reached the window. His pulse spiked as he yanked back the curtain. Fire. Bright, angry flames devoured the wooden fence, casting flickering shadows across the yard. Adrenaline surged through him as he sprinted outside, grabbing the garden hose. The moment he squeezed the trigger, he knew he was fighting a losing battle. Water hissed against the flames, but they were spreading too fast, feeding on dry wood, climbing higher. The heat seared his face. If the wind shifted, his house could be next. "Get the kids inside now!" he shouted to Sarah. The wail of sirens cut through the chaos. A minute later, fire trucks screeched to a stop in front of the house. Firefighters leaped out, dragging hoses, shouting commands. Within moments, powerful jets of water crashed against the inferno, steam rising in thick plumes. Eric stood frozen, fists clenched, watching as his fence collapsed in a smoldering heap. His stomach churned. This wasn't an accident. The fire chief confirmed his worst fear. "This was arson," he said grimly, towing a charred gas can near the remains of the fence. "Whoever did this wanted it to spread." Eric's mind raced. He had one real enemy. Two, actually. His jaw tightened as he hurried inside, pulling up the footage from his security cameras. His hands shook as he scrubbed through the timestamps, but when he saw it, his blood ran ice cold. Todd and Greg. Two blurred figures lurking near the fence just minutes before the fire started. Eric's vision tunneled as he hit play again, watching them move in the shadows, lingering just long enough before disappearing. He felt sick. These weren't just con artists shaking him down for cash. They were willing to destroy his home. Maybe even worse. By the time the police arrived, Eric was ready to see them dragged away in cuffs. He shoved his laptop at the officer, voice tight with fury. "They were here, minutes before the fire. Arrest them." The officer studied the footage, then exhaled through his nose. "Do you have proof they lit the fire themselves?" Eric's fists clenched. "Are you kidding me? They were trespassing. They threatened me." The officer's jaw tensed. "It's not enough. We'll investigate, but proving arson without catching them in the act is tricky." Eric felt something snap inside him. The law was too slow. The system wasn't going to stop them. But he would. Eric didn't just want revenge. He wanted justice. The police might have dragged their feet, but he had no intention of waiting for them to act. He needed undeniable proof, something so damning that even the slowest bureaucrat wouldn't be able to ignore it. So, he dug deep. Public records were a gold mine. Todd and Greg weren't even homeowners. They had no legal standing to enforce anything. But that was just the beginning. The real discovery? A trail of victims. Eric combed through forums, neighborhood Facebook groups, and public complaints. Dozens of people had been bullied into paying fake HOA fees, threatened with fines, foreclosure notices, even lawsuits. Some had coughed up a few $100 just to make them go away. Others had paid thousands. When Eric tallied it all up, the number was staggering. Over $50,000 stolen. His hands clenched into fists. These weren't just low-level scammers. They were predators, shaking down innocent homeowners for months, maybe years. But knowing the truth wasn't enough. He needed a confession. Eric played the part perfectly. Word spread that he had come to his senses and was ready to pay up. He made sure the news reached the right ears. And just like that, they took the bait. Todd and Greg showed up at his door, smirking like they already had the money in their pockets. What they didn't know? Eric was recording everything. He had his phone discreetly streaming audio straight to a live meeting of the real HOA board just down the street. Every word, every threat, broadcast in real time. "You're making the right choice, man," Greg said, arms crossed. "You pay, we don't have to escalate again." Eric forced a grin. "Oh, I know exactly how you escalate." Right on cue, sirens. The street lit up in red and blue. Todd and Greg turned, confusion flashing across their faces. But before they could react, officers swarmed the porch. "You're under arrest," one of them barked. "Fraud, conspiracy, and arson." Handcuffs clicked shut. This time, there was no hesitation. The moment Todd and Greg were hauled away in handcuffs, the neighborhood changed. At first, it was quiet, stunned silence as people processed what had just happened. Then came the whispers, the phone calls, the texts. Within hours, Eric's security footage and audio recording had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had lived in fear finally found the courage to step forward. It turned out Todd and Greg had extorted nearly everyone on the block. Families who had paid up just to be left alone. Elderly homeowners who had been tricked into believing their properties were at risk. Single parents who couldn't afford legal trouble and gave in to their threats. Now, no one was staying silent. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. Social media exploded with outrage as news outlets picked up the case. But the real shock? Todd and Greg weren't working alone. Investigators uncovered a whole network of fake HOA enforcers running similar scams in multiple neighborhoods, raking in hundreds of thousands of dollars from unsuspecting homeowners. Eric didn't just protect his home, he helped take them all down. Months passed, but the impact of what had happened never faded. One morning, Eric stepped outside to find his neighbors gathered in his yard, some carrying wood, others with toolboxes in hand. He didn't need to ask why. They were rebuilding his fence, the one Todd and Greg had tried to burn, the one meant to scare him into submission. But this? This wasn't just a fence, it was a statement. a symbol of a community that refused to be bullied again. As the last board was nailed into place, someone handed Eric a plaque, just a small metal plate screwed onto the corner of the fence. "In unity we stand." Justice wasn't just served, it was set in stone.